welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Allison Clarke and I'm a senior portrait and wedding photographer based out of New Hampshire, and I'm also an educator for those who are just starting their own photography businesses and want to learn a little bit more on how to boost them. In past videos, I've talked a lot about senior portrait editing and I've talked about senior portrait posing, but I wanted to kind of reel it back and work backwards and talk about something that happens kind of before the editing and before posing, and that is composing your portraits. And I'm going to split this video into two parts because I have 6 tips that I want to share with you guys, but I want to be able to dive deep into them, so I'm going to break up this video, and this week we're going to talk about 3 of them, and next week we'll talk about the other 3. These composition tips will help improve your portraits in camera so that you don't have to worry so much about trying to save them in post-processing when you're in Lightroom or when you're in Photoshop. Getting it right in camera really is the best way because it saves you so much time later on and just makes your life a little bit easier. So without further ado, here are 3 of my favorite portrait photography composition tips. Tip number 1 is to fill the frame. Something that I see some amateur portrait photographers doing is leaving a lot of headspace above their clients, or a lot of space, below, so they don't crop it quite right. But what you really want to do is fill the frame so that there's not so much negative space around your subject. So a good portrait, there'll be a little bit of headroom, but not a lot. Some people might place the face in the center of the photograph because that's where your focal point is. But what you really should do is either move your focal point or focus and recompose by using back button focusing, which I've talked about in previous videos. So that is the first tip, is to make sure that you are filling the frame, not leaving a bunch of headspace or negative space above the heads of your clients or kind of below their waists or their feet, making sure to fill that frame and be purposeful and intentional with what you're including. Portrait composition tip number 2 is all about the rule of thirds and how it relates to eye placement. So if you've been in photography for a while or even just a short period of time, you've probably heard of the rule of thirds. Which basically means that you should never have the subject of your photograph right in the center of your photo. You should always place them into one of the thirds, either vertically or horizontally. I like to place things at the meeting points of those lines. And I like to do that specifically with the eyes. So let's say if I'm shooting vertically into like a portrait mode and not landscape, I want to make sure that my eyes of my subject are kind of on that top line and not just lingering in that middle square if you were to put a grid on it. So I always like to just make sure that those eyes, or at least the in between their eyes, is kind of at one of those intersecting points. And then going back to our last tip about filling the frame, I try to do it at one of the top points and not the bottom point, because then I'd be leaving way too much head space or negative space above the head. But yes, that is the second portrait photography composition tip, is to be careful of where you place the eyes in relation to the rule of thirds. And if you want to be the most successful in your composition, I highly recommend putting them at one of the top intersecting points of your photograph. Portrait composition tip number 3 is to provide direction. So typically when we're posing somebody for a portrait, we might have them facing straight towards us, but we also might have them turned so they're facing the side. When you do that, you need to be aware of the direction that they're facing and where you're leaving room. So for example, if this video right here was a photograph and I put my subject where I am right now, leaving some space to the side of me, I would want to make sure that my subject is turned this way, so that I am looking into the direction of the negative space instead of putting my back to the negative space, because then your subject is looking off into nothing. You always want to make sure that your subject is facing the negative space so that the viewer of the photograph has something to follow, and that the subject's eyes are not just looking off into nothing, leaving the viewer wondering, where they're facing, where they're looking off to. So it's always important to provide direction to both be careful of the direction that you're facing your subject and provide direction for the viewer's eye when they're later looking at your photograph. So there you have it. That is part 1 of my 2-part series about portrait composition. The next video will be coming out next Friday, so definitely hit that subscribe button to make sure that you're notified and you can get the last 3 tips to better your portrait photography compositions. If you have any questions at all about what I just talked about, leave them in the comments below. And if you have any ideas for future videos, please leave those in the comments below as well. I'm always open to taking ideas and would love to know more about what you guys have questions on so that I can make videos that are relevant to you and your needs. Make sure to leave a like if this video was helpful to you, and also check out the description below for links to my social media pages and my website, and a link to my free download. It is called Posing with Confidence, 6 tips to help you slay your next senior session, and it is my top 6 tips, my 6 strategies that I use at every session that will help you boost your client experience, pose your clients with more confidence, and help them feel more comfortable in front of the camera. If you haven't snagged it yet, definitely click that link below and hop on it. Like I said, it is totally free to download, so definitely don't miss out on that. Like I said, make sure to tune in next Friday when I reveal my other 3 top portrait photography composition tips. Part 2 of this series. Hit the subscribe button if you want to be notified, and I will see all of your lovely faces next Friday.